Hi, I'm Old Sneelock. Welcome to another episode of Old Sneelock's Workshop. I'm going to be working on the outlet boxes and junction boxes. This is an oversized outlet cover. Nice for old work. The old junction boxes, when they put them in the wall, they didn't necessarily do a good job around them. Also, when you take off the cover and somebody's painted the cover on before, you take off the cover and it tears the wallpaper around the outside. So this larger cover hides that. A little bigger, doesn't look odd when it's on the wall, but it does make it so that you don't have to go through and do quite as much patching. It's always an annoying part of doing the work, is having to go through and make everything look good, which I want to do. I want to have everything look good when I'm done, but I don't want to spend most of my time just trying to get things to go back together again so that they'll work. Doing extra work for no apparent reason other than somebody messed up. But that was one of the reasons we got called back again and again and again to do work for people, is because when we left, we didn't leave any cut-ins of wire on the floor. We took care of everything that we opened up, we closed. The junction boxes were all covered, the switches were all working, the lights were all new bulbs, and everything was made so that it was operational. And the floor was clean. Ran the vacuum cleaner, swept up the basement, and ran the vacuum cleaner over the carpet where I had to cut plasterboard loose and put down newspaper so that it wouldn't get down into the carpet. Just extra work, but it really makes a difference to customers. And I know now that if somebody came into my house and started working on something and didn't do that, I'd be very unhappy with them. Of course, I haven't had an electrician work on my house since Dad died, so I do all the work. I know who did it, I know who's going to clean it up. So I try not to make a big mess to start with. Okay, now I'm going to go through and start putting the switches in this box. I have a single switch for the fan, and power is supplied to the 3 switches by this wire that comes from that panel over and supplies power to the 3 switches. The overhead outlets are powered by the light, the overhead outlets are going to be powered by the run from that panel, and it feeds the yard light and the junction boxes for the outlets. Now this is the fan switch, so it's going to end up on that side. This is the fan switch. It's going to end up on this side. Right here on the tab, it's stamped top. This is the switch that runs the fan. That is the top, that's on. This is off. Also, if you read the lettering on the bottom, it says Legrand. That's written so that you read it that way. Now, normally this would be the on position, and this would be off. On, off. So I want to have it that way so that when I walk through a house, I'm not trying the top switch and then the bottom switch to see which one's working and then wondering why the lights aren't on. I want to be consistent. I'm having a problem with the ground wires on these switches, mostly because the wire is stranded. And I'm using stranded wire because I'm pulling it through conduit. Trying to pull solid wire through a conduit is tough. You can do it, but you saw how much I had to pull and fiddle and fuss with things just to get the stranded wire through an outlet or through a conduit. By the time I get a solid wire pulled through, I'm gonna have put in a whole lot more work than I want to. So, by using stranded means that it tends to fray out when you try and put it under a screw. So putting on a crimp end, a wire terminal, let's see who's trying to bother me now. Two 266-023-0283 from Michigan. I don't know that person. Most of my phone calls are spam. The phone is set to mark everything as potential spam that's potentially spam. And everybody that I know and want to have call me, I put their number in the system so that it recognizes and tells me who it is. So if it's not somebody I recognize, I don't bother. I don't have time to spend answering the phone 25 times an hour sometimes. It's a huge amount of time wasted on doing that. Okay. So now what I've got is I've got a wire here that has to feed 3 circuits. This black wire feeds power to these 3 circuits. So I'm going to be putting power to this red wire on this switch, and then these 2 black ones through the other switches. Some of the fly-by-night guys, they would just stab that wire into that little hole, and it does make a connection. It does work. But the minute there's any condensation or any kind of introduction of contaminants into that circuit or into that little hole, the wire starts to corrode because it's dissimilar metals. There's brass and copper, and it'll corrode. Then you lose the connection. Then your switch won't work, and you get a call back. Now, if you're a good company, you go back and fix it. If you're a fly-by-night company, you're not going to go back. You don't care. So, since I'm a good company, and this is my house, I want to have it work the first time, every time. As long as I have the switch there, I want to have that switch work forever. So I'm going to use the screw and know that I've tightened it down and torqued it to the point where it's going to stay and not come loose, and I don't have to worry about it. It's unfortunate that some companies don't do that. They see that as a needless expense. I'm spending a lot more time on this job than most people would bother with. But I have a vested interest in doing this correctly. Oh, that's handy. What I'm doing is just checking out the circuitry on this switch. This switch is a duplex switch. It has two switches built into one. Because I wanted to have the lights on one switch so that I could just go, okay, turn on both of them at once, turn off both of them at once. Also, it takes up less room in the junction box. This is the first time I've ever worked with this company, and I could make it so that this switch is isolated completely from the bottom switch. Top switch and bottom switch would not be connected. They would have two different power sources. One power source would connect to this side, the other power source would connect to this side. But since both of these light runs are going to be getting their power from the same conductor over there in the main panel, I want to have it so that I'm just connecting one black wire to this and then tying that into the power leg inside the panel. Takes up less room, means one less wire to make, one less wire to fiddle with, and more room inside the junction box. These two switches are going to go on the outside next to the door. So as I walk in, I just touch this and I turn on both lights, or a single light if I want. I've got it divided up into east lights, which is that end of the building, and west lights, which is that end of the building. East and west is a simple thing for me to remember. I have the ability to know exactly where north is no matter where I'm at, unless it's a very cloudy day and I have been driving on crooked roads. I have noticed that I do tend to get disoriented. But most of the time I can tell you which way north is. That's north. So, when I'm doing the building, I'm talking about having the west end of the building and the east end of the building, rather than trying to say by the door, near the door, over, under the... Just want to have simple things that everybody understands. Now my wife, unfortunately, is not blessed with the same ability. So I'm kind of a guide when it comes to doing that. And marking things has to have more than one reference. So I have front light and west light. Because when I was doing the marking of the wires, I fluctuated a bit. Top one is going to be front lights. Nearest the big roll-up door. Because who knows, in 20 years, if I'm lucky, I might be back out here doing something else to the wiring. And saying, I wonder which wire that was. Oh, it's this one. It's this one. That'll be sweet. This set of wire strippers that Matt sent off to me, and I appreciate them greatly. They were confusing and when I first started because I just picked them up and started trying to use them. Well, I did some studying and I went online and looked, and on the back it says larger wire, 10 gauge, etc. You turn this little brass screw to the right. Smaller wire, 24 gauge, etc. You turn it to the left, counterclockwise. For you guys with digital clocks, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So you do a right-hand turn on this button, on this little brass nut here, and it sets a little catch in the back that puts more drag on this movable jaw so that this jaw doesn't want to slide away as easy. See how those two jaws slide apart? The tighter you make that one, the more grip there is on this little jaw here, and it grabs a hold of the wires tighter and makes it so that when you pull on the wire, it pulls off the insulation. And I saw one poor fella on YouTube said, never buy these, they don't work. Well, he was having a hard time with them. He hadn't read the same things that I did, so he didn't know how to adjust that little brass screw. Once you got the brass screw adjusted, it works like a charm. Okay. This one and this one. This one's already stripped, so I'm going to do this. Join these together with a red wire nut, which will handle 3 number 12s quite easily. I used the red one on this one because I got 4 wires into it. But because I have this duplex switch in there, I don't need to do that. Okay, so one wire goes into this switch. I want to twist the wires a little bit so they don't fray out as I'm putting them into under the screw heads. All this talking is probably why I'm not any further along than I am on this job. And I might be boring some of you to pieces. If so, just carry on as if I'm not here. You can skip ahead and hop from place to place in the video until you find something you like, or just move on to the next one. Always try and leave 6 inches inside the junction box, because I used to work on a lot of old circuits. We rewired houses that were wired in the 20s or earlier. Some of them had 12-volt wire left over from where they had circuitry from a battery operated system. And the junction boxes were tiny. So they put as little wire into those junction boxes as they could. Now in the early days, you could use old wire in a house. You could tie onto it. You just had to make sure it worked well. It's hard to believe, but there wasn't really a whole lot of controls on electricians when my dad first started, when my grandfather started. My grandfather took lessons in how to be an electrician by mail. He had a manual that showed him how the wires were supposed to be hooked, and he went ahead and figured it all out by hand, or by himself I should say, and put the wires in place. So his method of doing that might not have been the same as someone else's. As long as everything worked, it was fine. But then municipalities and counties, various other organizations decided that they should be more consistent and have everything connected the same, which made sense. Having an electrician that went from one house to the next, wiring up things differently each time, meant that everything was kind of wonky. My dad was one of the first licensed electricians in Coldwater, because when they started doing licensing, they went through and said, okay, everybody who is an electrician right now is going to stay an electrician. We won't take away your job. So if somebody said, I'm an electrician, they got a license. Now my dad was an electrician, had been working with my grandfather for years. They had worked out ways to do things. And my dad was also a radioman in the Second World War, so he understood a lot about electricity and how it operates. And he also was a very meticulous person. He wanted it done. He wanted it done right. He didn't want to mess around and have to come back. So when we wired something, we did it so that we only had to be on that job one time. No money to be made coming back a second time. Besides that, once you get a reputation of not doing a good job, finding work is much more difficult. Okay. Now I'm going to put things in here loosely because I haven't rung anything, I haven't tested anything yet, and I might find that I have made a mistake. I don't usually, but it's a lot easier if you allow yourself to come back and check things. without having to take everything apart. And you'll notice I'm doing all this talking, and I'm doing a lot of this explanation and testing and checking and everything down here where I'm standing on the floor or sitting on a chair, because it makes life easier. And the whole goal of life is not to make it difficult. Do it once, do it right. Go on to the next one. Not a big fan of putting 3 washers on these screws. Fortunately, I won't have to do a lot of it because I only have this little bit to do. Ran into a situation where someone put outlets into walls and they had done tile. And to make the outlets come out flush with the tile, because the tile was a little bit higher than that. Hey Google, what's the name of the square drive screwdrivers? Hey Google, square drive screwdriver. Robertson screwdriver. They don't give Robertson any credit anymore. They just call them square drive screwdrivers. But a Robertson screw has got a square drive on it. And they've started using it on electrical work. I like it. Problem I was having was I was using a magnetic extension to drive the screws because it's smaller than this click-on. And it works, but when you pull on the screw, when you engage the screw, then you get it tight and you pull the screwdriver off of it, it pulled it out of this little magnetic extension. So I put it back into the... Now let's set the screw, let's set the cover plate on there, make sure I got everything all good to go. I'll have to come back, because after I test everything all out, I got in the habit, because that's what my dad wanted me to do. I put a piece of tape over the connections on the switches and the outlets so that nothing in this junction box can come up against them and ground them out. Dad was part of the committee that worked on the electrical, I forget what they called it. Anyways, it was a group that got together, group of electricians, and set up the rules for cold water. And Dad worked on that committee. I'm very proud of him. He did a great job. All the people on that committee were very good electricians. We worked with him, well, all my young life. And later on, when I became a maintenance manager for companies, they worked for me wiring buildings and installing heavy equipment. There. That's good. Now, I don't think I'm going to be in and out of this one, so I'm going to go ahead and close up that pulling teeth. If I absolutely need to, I certainly can remove it, remove the cover and get in there and work on it, but I don't expect to have to. Having that gripper sure is handy. I'm not into crawling around on the floor as much as I used to be. Not that I ever was, but I try and avoid it whenever possible. There. Now I will be taking this off and wrapping that set of switches here with wire. Same thing on that outlet. But for right now, I don't want to have to put all that on and take it all off. I want to test the wiring. Well, I have the outlet mounted and the 2 switches by the door mounted. Now I have to go up into the rafters and do the rest of the work, but it's time for supper, so I gotta go in and start making supper. If you have any suggestions for new video, questions about today's video, or any of the other videos on the channel, just drop a note in the comments. You know I read them all. Thanks for watching.
This video is not to be viewed by anyone under the age of 13 in the U.S. or 16 in the European Union without the express written permission of the parents or the legal guardians of the underage person. Such written permission must be on file at the local government entity in charge of enforcing the rules and regulations established by the FTC. Anyone violating these terms is admitting by default that they hold harmless the owners and operators of this channel. Any and all questions should be addressed to your local branch of the FTC.